All right, so ready to dive into something a little different today. We're talking toys and games specialized sellers.
Mm.
I gotta say, after digging into this career path on RoleCatcher, I'm kind of fascinated.
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't really think about, Like, someone's got to sell the toys, but it's way more than just that.
Right. It's not just about stocking shelves and ringing up purchases.
Yeah.
This guide makes it clear this is a real career path.
Absolutely. And the industry itself is booming. It's not your grandma's toy store anymore. We're talking technology, evolving ideas about play. It's pretty wild.
That's exactly what caught my eye. So let's dive into this RoleCatcher guide. First thing that struck me, the sheer variety of stuff these sellers do.
Oh, totally. I mean, you need that connection with customers, obviously, but also a deep understanding of the products themselves. And then they're staying ahead of the trends. Did you see the bit about digital toys? A whole other world.
I know. It's not just knowing your board games anymore. And remember that part about heavy boxes of FUN? Sounds like you got to be pretty strong for this job.
Yeah, there's definitely a physical aspect to it, no doubt. But I think it speaks to something we're seeing a lot in retail these days, that whole desire for an experience.
So true. People want to be hands-on, especially with toys. It's about that tangible, tactile.
Exactly. It's not just clicking add to cart online. So these sellers, they're kind of like curators of joy, right?
I love that. Curator of joy. Okay, but what does that actually look like day to day? Give me an example.
Well, think about it. You've got a parent overwhelmed by choices, a kid glued to the latest video game console. The toys and games specialized seller, they bring that human touch.
Okay, I can see that. Guiding choices, creating excitement. It takes a certain personality, which reminds me, I love how this guide lays out the pros and cons. No sugarcoating.
Yeah, they get right to it.
Like, flexible hours. Sign me up. But then, fluctuating income. That's a real consideration.
It's the reality of retail, unfortunately. And this field especially, tied to seasons, trends, all that. You got to be adaptable, not just with your time, but financially too.
Makes you wonder, are there certain personality types that do better in this kind of environment?
It really makes you think, yeah. I'd say someone who thrives on change, for sure. Got to be quick on your feet, problem solver, and ideally, genuinely energized by the world of play.
Because it's not just selling a product, it's selling that idea of play, right?
Yeah.
Which is, when you think about it, pretty cool.
And increasingly important, wouldn't you say? I mean, with screens everywhere, that tangible joy, the spark of imagination, it's special.
Totally agree. Okay, speaking of sparks, the career progression path outlined here
Uh-huh.
blew my mind. You can go from sales associate all the way to, like, regional sales manager.
It's a path most people wouldn't expect, but the opportunity is there. The guide really emphasizes continuous learning, networking, building your own brand.
They even mentioned starting a blog, which, in the age of influencers, I don't know, it felt kind of brilliant. But does that actually work in this industry?
That's a great question. And to answer it, I think we need to zoom out a bit. Look at the language in the definitions section. It talks about, and I quote, fostering a lifelong love for learning and recreation. That's pretty deep for a toy store job, right?
Wow, you're right. It's like they're taking this whole concept of play and elevating it.
Exactly. And that ties into these larger trends we're seeing, right? The importance of play in child development, that blurring of physical and digital. It really makes you think twice about, just a toy store job, right? And it's not all smiles and playtime either. The guide gets into some pretty specific skills. Persuasion, active listening, sales, even marketing. I mean, is this a job you need a business degree for?
Right. It's not all fun and games, though I did notice they highlighted those, what do they call them, soft skills, the stuff you don't necessarily learn in a classroom.
Exactly. It's that ability to connect, whether it's with a 5-year-old who's obsessed with dinosaurs or like a grandparent looking for the perfect puzzle, understanding their needs, offering recommendations, just creating that positive experience.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, no amount of charm can make up for not knowing your Legos from your LOL surprise dolls, though, right?
Exactly. Expertise still matters big time. And that's where the whole continuous learning thing comes in. This isn't one of those fields where you can just coast. You got to be a sponge, constantly soaking up info about new products, trends, even like child development stages.
Okay, I'm taking notes. But where do you even begin to learn all that?
That's where the resourcefulness comes in, I guess. The guide mentioned attending industry trade shows like Toy Fair. There's also Toy World magazine. And of course, social media is huge for keeping up with what's new and hot.
So, much like the toys themselves, this career path is all about constant evolution. Which brings us back to that career progression thing. You really can climb the ladder in this field, it seems.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You might start as a sales associate, getting that customer interaction down, mastering the product knowledge, but then boom, you're assistant store manager, maybe, taking on more responsibility, leadership, inventory, maybe even some data analysis.
And then, who knows? With enough hustle, you're a regional sales manager overseeing multiple stores, making big decisions, a real toy tycoon. Speaking of which, remember that blog idea? They actually highlighted that as a way to gain recognition.
Yeah, might seem a little out there, but in the age of influencers, it makes sense. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of an employer. Would you be more impressed by a generic resume or someone who's out there sharing their passion, building a following?
That's a great point. It's like a portfolio, but for your love of toys. Plus, think of all the cool stuff you'd get to review. Okay, you've convinced me starting a toy blog tonight, but what about those of us who aren't quite ready for the influencer life? Any other advice for breaking into this world?
One thing they mentioned that I thought was interesting was thinking outside of traditional retail experience. Volunteering at children's events, for example, it's a chance to show your enthusiasm, get some real world interaction, you know.
Genius. What kid doesn't love the person who brings the fun, right? But what about someone coming from a completely different field? Is it even possible to make that jump into the world of toys?
You'd be surprised. The guide actually talked about how transferable skills can be super valuable. Think about those core competencies we discussed. Communication, problem solving, customer service. Those are important anywhere.
So it's about reframing your experience, right? Like instead of calming down a frustrated client on the phone, you're helping a parent navigate a tantrum in the action figure aisle.
Exactly. Highlighting how your skills translate. Plus, never underestimate the power of genuine enthusiasm. Passion can go a long way, especially in a field like this.
That's encouraging. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The guide doesn't sugarcoat the challenges either, which I appreciate.
Totally. Understanding the demands is just as important as being excited about the opportunities. So in the cons section, anything that jumped out at you?
Well, the fluctuating income thing is definitely something to consider.
Mm.
But I was also curious about that whole seasonal demand aspect. Is this like a job where you're working around the clock during the holidays and then twiddling your thumbs in January?
It's definitely a factor, yeah. The holiday season is huge for the toy industry, so longer hours, faster pace, that comes with the territory. But a really successful toys and games specialized seller, they find ways to be adaptable and proactive year-round.
So it's about finding ways to engage customers even when it's not gift-giving season.
Exactly. That's where the creativity comes in. The guide talked about staying on top of new releases, maybe even organizing in-store events, partnering with local schools, community centers.
Wow, so there's a lot more strategy involved than people realize. It's not just knowing your products, it's understanding your customers, adapting to the market, always innovating.
And that's what makes it both challenging and rewarding. It's a career that demands a lot, but it also offers a chance to have a real impact, not just on a business, but on people's lives.
You're right, because at the end of the day, it's about bringing joy to people of all ages. And in today's world, that's a pretty special thing to be a part of.
Absolutely. But before we get too sentimental, there's one more crucial aspect we need to address. Safety considerations.
I'll admit, when I saw safety precautions in the guide, I was like, wait, what? I mean, it's a toy store, right? What could go wrong?
And that's why it's so important to talk about safety, especially with kids involved. It's not always obvious.
So beyond like the classic tripping over a toy truck scenario.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here?
Well, one thing they specifically mentioned was making sure toys are age appropriate. Seems obvious, but...
Right, but you give a toddler a toy with small parts.
Exactly. Or a child playing with something beyond their developmental capabilities. Those are real hazards.
It's true. You don't think about a water gun being dangerous, but for a 2-year-old who could slip and fall.
Right. Makes you see those aisles differently. And it goes beyond the actual toys, too. Loose wires, slippery floors, those hazards exist everywhere. But in a toy store, with kids running around excited.
You're asking for trouble if you're not careful. So not only do you need to know the hottest toys, you got to be a safety inspector, play supervisor, customer service expert. This is a demanding job.
It is. And get this, they even mentioned staying on top of product recalls, safety warnings from manufacturers. That's a lot to juggle.
It really makes you realize the level of responsibility these sellers have. You're not just making a sale, you're playing a part in keeping kids safe.
Exactly. And I think that sense of responsibility alongside the demands, it's what makes the reward so meaningful.
Such a good point. Wow, this deep dive has been eye-opening. This career path is so much more than I initially thought.
It's amazing what you discover when you really dig into these niche roles.
Seriously. Who knew selling toys involved psychology, trend forecasting, risk management? It's like the ultimate crash course in business, child development, and pop culture.
And it's an industry that's constantly changing, just like the toys themselves. As technology evolves, the demand for people who really understand this world, that's only going to grow.
Makes you think, maybe someday there'll be a Grammy for, like, Toys and Games Specialized Seller of the Year.
Now that's an award show I'd watch. But until then, I think we should leave our listeners with this. Next time you're in a toy store, take a moment to really appreciate the people behind the counter. They're not just salespeople, they're curators of joy, educators, guardians of safety. They're shaping young imaginations, one toy at a time.
Beautifully said. And hey, who knows? Maybe this deep dive will inspire someone out there to join their ranks. Until next time, everyone, happy playing.